Hi guys, ZCrazyG here, back with another video. So I'm sure by now we have all heard the rumblings about a potential brand new Crash Bandicoot game in the works. If not, I would recommend checking out the video I made about it, rounding up all the information that we know. So yeah, there's all these rumours going around about a new mainline Crash game that will be announced at the Game Awards, all very exciting stuff. And yeah, it's great to get hyped up and discuss the idea of a brand new game, but today I want to discuss what we would like from this potential new game. What would I like the game to be like? What decisions should they make and what direction should they take? As a lifelong fan of Crash, I want this potential game to be as good as it can so that the franchise can have a healthy and prosperous future. But at the same time, I acknowledge that these things I'm about to talk about are things that I as an individual want to see. I'm sure everyone has their own idea of what they want from a new Crash game, so just keep in mind that this is strictly what I would like to see. So without further ado, let's get right into this. Most importantly, keep the classic Crash formula that we all know and love. But don't just stick to that. Innovate as well, spice things up, but without going too far. Now, this potential new game will have a fine line to tread, mainly between keeping the gameplay that made Crash work while also keeping things fresh and adding new ideas to the mix. Going too far either one way or the other, I feel would ultimately lead the franchise back into a downward spiral. And I say that because we've seen it happen before, and I don't want the franchise to repeat these mistakes. The original trilogy kept innovating gradually with each release, not changing the core gameplay at heart, but still pushing the envelope that bit more without straying too far, creating a solid trilogy that we all love. Now, Wrath of Cortex is an example of what happens when you play it too safe. That's not to say that Wrath of Cortex is bad, because I don't think it is. In fact, I think when it stuck to classic Crash platforming, I think it did it very well. But ultimately, it never took any risks or made that many worthwhile changes to the formula, and even in some instances made some gameplay aspects worse. In the end, just kind of feeling like a watered down expansion for Crash 3. Now, on the other hand, Crash of the Titans is an example of what happens when you take it too far in the other direction. Now, I have said this before and I'll say it again, Crash of the Titans is not a bad game, it's just not a good Crash Bandicoot game. While there are slight traces of the original style in there, it's a completely new gameplay formula overall that is just simply not Crash Bandicoot. So how could they go about doing the gameplay right? Well, I think the best way is just to do what Naughty Dog did. Keep the main style of gameplay for the most part, but push the boat out on certain aspects to make things more interesting. Just because Crash levels are mainly linear pathways does not mean that they can't have interesting level design, as the original games show. Be really creative with platforming challenges and even expand on certain mechanics. For example, leaks suggest that we will be seeing new masks in this new game, so perhaps we could utilize these different masks to affect gameplay in different ways. Maybe add new power-ups from defeating bosses that can be used in creative ways. Hell, maybe even add a few Twin Sanity style levels in there. Now by that I'm mainly referring to levels such as Jungle Bungle or Ice Climb, where they're not necessarily open areas but are open plains with a linear path to follow. Maybe adding a few levels like these in between would also be a good idea to keep things interesting. We are also supposedly getting levels where we get to play as Cortex in the new game, and hey, they could play entirely differently to Crash's levels. Just as long as they don't put too much focus on it, then it would be a really cool addition to spice things up. But ultimately, keep the focus on the classic style of Crash levels, but just simply be more creative with them and experiment without losing what makes them great. That way we can still have the Crash gameplay we know and love without making it either feel old and stale or a complete departure from what we expect. Now of course, we shouldn't get rid of vehicle levels entirely, because they are what helps to break up the platforming formula and add more variety. However, I feel the vehicle levels should only be an occasional thing, something I feel both Wrath of Cortex and even Crash 3 didn't really do. I personally think Crash 2 balanced this the best, with the only full-on vehicle levels we had in that game being the polar bear riding levels and the jetpack levels, and occasionally a vehicle spliced into the middle of a platforming-centric level. They didn't overstay their welcome and they went for quality over quantity. In Crash 3, I'll be honest, I don't really like most of the vehicle levels. While I do enjoy the purer levels and I don't mind the flying levels, I'm not really a fan of the diving levels and the jet ski levels, and I especially dislike the motorbike levels. And the problem is that these vehicle levels make up almost half of the level selection in Crash 3, for God's sake. I'd rather they focus on a few vehicle concepts that are fun and then give them just 1 or 2 levels each maximum, and then maybe have a few sections spliced into platforming levels. Though while we are on the subject of vehicles, I do want to make one potentially controversial request. I would actually like to receive the return of the rolling ball levels from Wrath of Cortex. I really like these, and in my opinion they are probably one of the only good new additions that game brought to the table. I know I'm most likely alone on that thought, but I just personally really enjoyed them. Now, the great thing about the original trilogy is that with each game they got more ambitious with the settings and themes for the levels, with the first game sticking to the main islands, Crash 2 taking us to some other locations around the world, and then Crash 3 taking us through goddamn time. And even the following games took us to newer and more unique locations, and I would love to see this trend continue. While of course we would want to see some familiar places, I would love to take Crash to locations we have never taken in before. Like for example, I'd love to see an urban city setting. It's not really somewhere we've seen Crash go, and it would make for a really cool level theme. But moreover this, I want to see more variety within the levels of the same theme. Now, what do I mean by this? Well, take the medieval levels from Crash 3 for example. There's 3 of them in the game and they all have the same locations and visuals with perhaps some lighting and weather changes. But I would instead prefer to see different locations within the same setting. This is one thing that Wrath of Cortex, to its credit, actually did very well. Take the levels Banzai Bonsai and Tsunami for example. Both are set in Japan with the same enemies, but they are set in different locations with different colour palettes and even different soundtracks, creating 2 separate and distinct atmospheres but under the same theme. I feel doing it this way allows for so much more variety in the presentation and theming. It just keeps things more fresh and interesting as opposed to just 3 levels with the exact same presentation style. Like, if you're gonna go for a snow theme, have one level where you're in a snowy alpine forest, one where you're in an ice cave, and one where you're in the mountains. You have a connecting theme, but there's just more variety there, and I feel it would go a long way into giving each level a more individual identity and make it more memorable. Also yeah, bring Joshua Mansell back to compose the music. The man's good, you got it for CTR, you can surely get him back for this. Cheers. Now, much like Mario games, story in a Crash game has never really been an important focus. And hey, I'm not asking for fucking Shakespeare here, but it would be nice to have something a bit better than Cortex wants to take over the world, needs power crystals, go get him before he does. I completely get that Crash Bandicoot isn't all about story, and yeah, it shouldn't be, but I just wish they would do something a bit more interesting for once in a while. The series has a really colourful cast of characters with a lot of personality, and it would be great for them to have more opportunity to explore that. Hell, if anything, this is something the later games in the series actually did really well. Twin Sanity, for example, though not having an amazing story by any means, at least shook up the status quo for once. There was a bit of mystery, the villains were all turning on each other, there was at least something different going on, and yet it still didn't take itself too seriously, it still felt suitable for Crash. I don't know, I just feel that there's more that they could do with this in a new game as opposed to a simple generic setup. And to end this all off, have more content in the game. More levels, more bosses, more of all that good stuff you'd come to expect from a Crash Bandicoot game. Now, you may think that this one probably goes without saying, right? Well, I have actually seen a few people say that they just want the same amount of levels from previous games. And my reaction to that is... What? What the fuck? I'm sorry, but if they released a new game with as many levels as, say, Crash 3, though I would still be happy, I would still say that's really short by today's standards. Look, the original games were made over 20 years ago on a significantly less powerful system than what we have now, and back then those games were great for that time. But this is 3 console generations later, we can surely do better than that. And I'm not trying to sound ungrateful or anything here, I'd be over the fucking moon just to get a brand new game. But I just feel going for the same amount of content as the PS1 games, it's just a really low bar considering that the developers will most likely have more resources and budget at their disposal. Now look, I'm not asking them to go crazy and make a massive game either. In the end, it should always be about quality over quantity. But I feel that with the technology available to us now, we should be aspiring to go even just a little bit bigger and better with Crash now. A potential new game would be his first outing in so long, so we'd want it to be as good as it can, so that we can ensure the series is stronger and better than ever going forward. Otherwise, what's the point in making a new game other than just banking on nostalgia? But hey, in the end, those are just my thoughts. I'm sure each and every one of you have your own ideas and wishes about what you'd want a new Crash Bandicoot game to be like. So because of that, I would really encourage you to share them in the comments, and I would love to discuss with you guys all your ideas. There's no real right or wrong here, we're just all sharing our opinions. And hey, who even knows if a new game is coming? We can't be 100% sure at this point. Though I will say, it is looking more likely than ever. I guess we'll just have to wait and see and hope. Thank you all so much for watching, everyone. It really does mean a lot. Feel free to like and subscribe if you feel like it, and I'll see you all in the next video. Take care, guys.